Next on the list is circulatory diseases, the number one killer of men and women. Among populations who ate plant-based diets, MS was almost non-existent. What about heart disease? Last year, the International Journal of Epidemiology reprinted a landmark article from the 50s that started out with a shocking statement. In the African population of Uganda, coronary heart disease is almost non-existent. Our number one cause of death almost non-existent? What were they eating? Plantains and sweet potatoes, other vegetables, corn, millet, pumpkins, tomatoes, and green leafy vegetables are taken by all. And their protein almost entirely from plant sources. And they had the cholesterol levels to prove it, similar to modern day plant eaters. Maybe the Africans were just dying early from other diseases, so never lived long enough to have a heart attack? No. Here's age-matched heart attack rates in Uganda versus St. Louis. Out of 632 autopsies in Uganda, 1 myocardial infarction. Out of 632 Missourians, same age and gender distribution, 136 myocardial infarctions. More than 100 times the rate of our number one killer. In fact, they were so blown away they did another 800 autopsies in Uganda, and still, just that one small healed infarct, meaning it wasn't even the cause of death, out of 1,427 patients, less than 1 in 1,000. Right? Whereas in the U.S., it's an epidemic. This is a list of diseases found commonly here and in populations that live and eat like the U.S., but were rare or even non-existent in populations eating diets centered around whole plant foods. These are among our most common diseases, like obesity, hiatal hernia, one of the most common stomach problems, hemorrhoids, and varicose veins are most common venous disorders, colorectal cancer, number 2 cause of cancer death, diverticulosis, number 1 disease of the intestines, appendicitis, number 1 cause of emergency abdominal surgery, gallbladder disease, number 1 cause of non-emergency abdominal surgery, and ischemic heart disease, our commonest cause of death here, but a rarity among plant-based populations. Heart disease is a choice, like cavities. Right? If you look at the teeth of people who lived over 10,000 years before the invention of the toothbrush, they pretty much had no cavities. Didn't brush a day in their lives, never flossed, no Listerine, no water pick, yet no cavities. Because, candy bars hadn't been invented yet. So why do people continue to get cavities when we know they're preventable through diet? Simple, right? Because the pleasure people derive from dessert, right, may outweigh the cost and discomfort of the dentist chair. And that's fine, right? Look, as long as people understand the consequences of their actions, right, as a physician, what more can I do, right? If you're an adult, and you decide the benefits outweigh the risks for you and your family, then, go for it. I certainly enjoy the occasional indulgence. I've got a good dental plan. Right? But what if instead of the plaque on your teeth, we're talking about the plaque building up in your arteries? Another disease that can be prevented by changing your diet. Then what are the consequences for you and your family? Right? Now we're not talking about scraping tartar anymore. Right? Now we're talking life and death. The most likely reason most of our loved ones will die is heart disease. It's still up to each one of us to make our own decisions as to what to eat and how to live, but we should make these choices consciously, educating ourselves about the predictable consequences of our actions. Atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, begins in childhood. By age 10, the arteries of nearly all kids have fatty streaks, the first stage of the disease. Then, plaques start forming in our 20s, get worse in our 30s, and then can start killing us off. In our heart, it's a heart attack. In our brains, it's a stroke. In our limbs, it can mean gangrene. In our aorta, an aneurysm. If there is anyone in this audience over the age of 10 years of age, the question isn't whether or not to eat healthy to prevent heart disease. It's whether or not you want to reverse the heart disease you already have. Ornish and Esselstyn proved you can reverse heart disease with a plant-based diet, but you don't have to wait for your first heart attack to unclog your arteries. We can start reversing our heart disease right now. We can start reversing the heart disease in our kids tonight. How do we do it? According to the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Cardiology this year, the only risk factor required for these atherosclerotic plaques, our number one killer, is cholesterol. Elevated LDL, so-called bad cholesterol, in our bloodstream. To drop our LDL cholesterol, we need to drop our intake of three things: trans fats, saturated fats, and dietary cholesterol. Trans fats increase our risk of heart disease, sudden death, diabetes, basically only found one place in nature, and that's animal fats. The food industry, however, found a way to synthetically create these toxic fats by hardening vegetable oil in a process called hydrogenation, which rearranges their atoms to make them act more like animal fats. Currently, nearly half of America's trans fat intake comes from animal products. According to the USDA, cheese, milk, yogurt, burgers, chicken fat, turkey meat, bologna, hot dogs contain up to between 1 to 5% trans fats naturally. They also found small amounts of trans fats in non-hydrogenated vegetable oils due to the refining process. Now, is getting a few percent trans fats a problem, though? The most prestigious scientific body in the United States, National Academies of Science, concluded that the only safe intake of trans fats is 0. Because any incremental increase in trans fatty acid intake increases, coronary heart disease risk. Trans fat intake, irrespective of source, hydrogenated junk food or animal fat, may increase cardiovascular disease risk. And because trans fats are unavoidable in ordinary non-vegan diets, getting down to 0 trans fats would require significant changes in the patterns of dietary intake for most Americans. One of the authors of the report, the director of Harvard's cardiovascular epidemiology program, famously explained why, despite this, they didn't recommend a plant-based diet. We can't tell people to stop eating all meat and all dairy products, he said. Well, we could tell people to become vegetarians, he added. If we were truly basing this only on science, we would, but it is a bit extreme. Wouldn't want scientists basing anything on science now, would we?